My name is Brian Willson, and I have virtually had no history with Ground Zero, but Ground Zero has had a big influence on me, even though I haven't been hanging around Ground Zero. My first exposure to just the whole issue of nuclear power and nuclear weapons was when I was in the Clamshell Alliance in New Hampshire in the late 70s, when we were resisting the large plant there, getting the licenses for that plant. But mostly because I'm a Vietnam veteran, had witnessed bombings in Vietnam and had been in the villages after the bombings, I was in general opposed to all weapons, conventional, nuclear, and it wasn't until I started going to Central America in the mid-1980s that I got really active again. I actually was a lawyer in the 70s doing a lot of prison work, but I wasn't ready to deal with U.S. foreign policy yet. And then in the 80s, I got really involved in following what was happening in El Salvador, Nicaragua, especially in Guatemala. And I had witnessed a whole lot of murders, or the aftermath of murders in Nicaragua. And while I was there in the mountains in '86, and again in '87, I shook the hands of 400 amputees. I was at many wakes. And I wanted to find out where these weapons were coming from. So, along with other people in the Bay Area, we discovered that the weapons that were going to Central America were coming from the Concord, California Naval Weapons Station, which is about 35 miles east of San Francisco. And they moved the weapons from the storage vaults, of which there were 300 at Concord, the conventional vaults. They also had nuclear vaults at another location at Concord. They moved those weapons on trains and trucks, tracks and road paralleling each other, only 3 miles to ships in the Sacramento River. And then they were shipped from there to El Salvador. And from there, some of them wound up in Honduras and in Nicaragua for the Contras, if some of you remember the Contra War. Well, I'm not a natural person to be confronting authority because I've had a really hard time dealing with authority figures ever since I was in the military. Actually, I like to avoid them. I don't like to see them. I don't like to be around their energy. I'm not very zen. So it's like so my tactic has been to be active, but be careful not to get too close to the uniform, because I don't know how I will react. So a bunch of us decided on June 10th, 1987, that we were going to begin an ongoing vigil at the Concord Naval Weapons Station. And immediately, the very first day, let me backtrack a little bit. I sent a letter on June 2nd to the base commander explaining exactly what was going to happen starting June 10th, that we would begin a sustained resistance at the base, and we would be blocking trucks and trains carrying munitions. And we would be upholding the Nuremberg obligation, and so we called ourselves Nuremberg Actions. The very first day, there were probably maybe 60 or 70 people there. That was June 10th. And immediately 6 or 7 people started blocking the trucks and trains. I was shocked because I have to prepare myself for a while. I'm just not the natural kind to do that. But I was impressed that these people were right away blocking the trucks, which ran on a road parallel to the tracks, literally 20 feet apart. And they were all arrested. And so we had a jail support committee. And I was thinking, I don't know whether these people have studied the history of train blockades, because I knew that sooner or later I was going to be blocking the trains. And so I did. I spent several weeks studying the history of blockades of trains. I studied the history of labor movement and labor strikes, where the railroad workers blocked trains. I studied the history of blockades during the Vietnam War of both troops and munitions. At several locations on the West Coast, I studied the history of Rocky Flats in Colorado, and of course I studied the history of Ground Zero and the White Train, and had noticed in my studies that nobody had ever been run over. So I thought, well, certainly this is not a dangerous thing to be doing, especially since we're doing it all in the open. This train only runs on 3 miles of track. It has a 5-mile-an-hour speed limit. It always has 2 spotters standing on the front of the locomotive whose job it is to see that the tracks are always clear. There were 350 armed Marines always within a half a mile of the train. And of course, their rules and protocol were that they were to stop for any impediment that was on the track and have the Marines or the local police remove the people and continue the train. So I decided, as I was watching all these people get arrested, that I would begin blocking the trains on September 1st, 1987. That was the 1-year anniversary of a Veterans Fast for Life I had participated in Washington, D.C. on the steps of the Capitol a year before. A 47-day water-only fast with 3 other veterans to oppose Reagan's policies in El Salvador and Nicaragua. So this was exactly 1 year later. And so I sent another letter to the commander explaining exactly what I and 2 others were going to do starting September 1st. We were going to do a 40-day water-only fast on the tracks. If we weren't on the tracks and we were in jail, we obviously couldn't be blocking the trains, but if we were released from jail, we would be immediately back on the tracks in that 40-day period. It was from September 1st to October 9th, I think, was the period. And so on September 1st, the 3 of us took our position on the tracks. And incidentally, in the military, I had been an installation security officer. So I had been through all kinds of trainings about how you run and operate military bases from a security point of view, running munitions, storing munitions, moving munitions. So it really, in my mind, was not an issue of any danger of doing what we were doing, just maybe some discomfort, embarrassing to my family, perhaps, but not anything dangerous. So what happened, as some of you may know, we took our position at about 10 of 12 on September 1st when the first train was coming. And we'd actually had a little press conference there at around 10:30, and then a little kind of reflective service around 11. And we're waiting for the first train. And we saw the train coming, as it always did, on a regular basis, with its light on and its 5-mile-an-hour speed, which was the legal speed limit of the train. And the next thing I know, I'm in the hospital. I actually don't have any memory of what happened. But what did happen was the train accelerated to 17 miles an hour. And there was 40 of my friends were there, so there were plenty of witnesses, 12 of whom were Vietnam veteran friends. My wife and my stepson. And the train accelerated. The FBI investigation of the one video footage that was available. The one video footage was my friend taking video footage of my arrest, hoping if there was any police abuse, we would have a record of it. as we were being dragged off the tracks, said that the train was accelerating to 16 to 17 miles an hour at the point of impact, and kept accelerating and kept on going until it was surrounded by Marines about 300 feet further down the tracks. Now, when I was in the hospital and people were trying to explain to me what happened, I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. I didn't remember it. And I was certainly covered from head to foot with bandages, and I didn't really know what had happened to me. But we discovered later, while I was in the hospital, somebody brought me a newspaper article from Peoria, Illinois, of all places, of an FBI agent who was fired for refusing to investigate Duncan Murphy, Charlie Lipke, George Mizo, and myself as members of the Veterans Fast for Life of the year before as domestic terror suspects. I thought, wow, domestic terror suspect, that is really bizarre. To a naive person like me. I mean, it's like, you just, of course, it's not so unusual, but I mean, at the time I was still like, this couldn't possibly happen. And then after that, we discovered that the train crew was ordered to run the train over us because they said we were going to hijack it. And so that was kind of a startling thing, because I had studied Ground Zero and Blocking the White Train and Rocky Flats and all these other places, and the trains just don't do that. They stop. They might intimidate you and drag you off the tracks with gruffly, but they would not run a train over you. So I thought many times that it was my letter that I read, and of course I still have a copy of the letter, my letter in some way, which was describing the Nuremberg principles, describing the evidence I had gathered personally in Latin America of what was happening with the weapons from Concord that were killing innocent people and maiming them, and that this was in no way was our action intending to be personal against anybody, but we wanted the base and the public to know that this base was supplying weapons in violation of international law to kill people. The weapons were specifically intending to go to certain places in El Salvador and Nicaragua that would be killing innocent people. So it was a two-page letter, but I many times have thought it was the letter that set in motion in their minds a war mentality. If I hadn't sent the letter, they would have treated it as a routine. I think they would have treated it as routine. They wouldn't have known particularly who I was. They would have treated it like they would any other obstacle on the tracks. You stop the train, remove the obstacle, and resume. But I do have to think that my letter created, it was almost like they took it almost personally that we were going to actually interfere. We are intending to interfere with the movement of your trains full of these munitions. They were white phosphorus rockets, they were 500-pound bombs, they were grenades, they were small arms ammunition, they were machine gun ammunition, whole boxcars full. So it's just an interesting thought that if I hadn't sent the letter, probably would have been treated routinely with an arrest because they had always arrested people and had never run over them. So I'm sorry to say that what happened to Concord wasn't following what I thought was going to happen from all my research about train blockades, but nonetheless, it of course opened up a whole other life. As the journey of life is unpredictable and one that never knows from one crisis to another where the opportunities lie for a whole other level of understanding and awareness. And so I want to thank Ground Zero for all of your work and all your inspiration. And by the way, after I was hit, every train was blocked for 7 years, day and night. There was always a group of people at the site that blocked every train. There were 2,300 arrests. People spent 6 months, as long as 6 months in jail, but every train was blocked for 7 years, which obviously is not likely to have happened if they hadn't run over me. So, and now the base is closed. Of course, they close one base and they open something else. So it's not that big of a deal, except that it does show that they are kind of terrified of people power.
Talking about the trains that didn't stop. In here, Kim was pulled off one of the first trains, pulled off the tracks, but the train did not stop. 1984, that was a big kind of fiasco, if you remember, and the train kept going in spite of people running along the side of the train and trying to get in front of the train. Only in February 1985, when I and Linda and some others stood in front of the train as part of a bargain that we made. We said, we want to sit on the tracks and we want the train to stop, and then you can take us off. So the train did stop in February 1985. And the other fact about that was that we were all found not guilty. The reason was because there weren't any no trespassing signs put on the tracks at that time.
Wonderful.
At Concord, they had a big sign right near where we vigiled explaining exactly what the penalty was for blocking the trains. The penalty was 1 year in prison and a $5,000 fine, which we, of course, knew about and were prepared to spend a year in prison. It didn't necessarily think we would get a year in prison, but the sign was right there. But I'm good to know about the history that the train did not stop, and the reason I wouldn't have known about it was because nobody was run over. I was looking for evidence that people had been run over by train. I'm a lawyer by training, so I develop my evidence and trying to develop a strategy based on the information I gather. So that's interesting to know that.
I have a question. Up here?
Yes.
Did you have to serve any time or pay any fines as a result of blocking the train?
Did everybody hear the question? Yeah. No. While I was in the hospital, I was interviewed by the first investigator, who was from the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Department, and he's the one that asked me when I had planned to board the train, and what I was going to do if I got on the train, which of course was an idea I had never even thought of. And he said that the DA would be charging me with trespassing. Even I don't know if they had actually no trespassing signs, but they did have the sign saying if you block munitions, what the penalty was. And then shortly after I got out of the hospital, the train crew, in a bizarre twist of American jurisprudence, sued me for causing them post-traumatic stress disorder. It's kind of like, wow. And the train crew were all veterans. The two spotters whose job it was, who actually were standing on the front of the locomotive, whose job it is to be radioing the engineer, they were both Vietnam veterans. And the engineer was a Vietnam era veteran. The Navy did a fairly competent investigation in which the Navy found that the train was speeding 16 to 17 miles an hour in a 5-mile-an-hour zone, that they could see us for 650 feet. And they never even attempted to brake. That was all in the Navy report. And the Navy actually recommended that the train crew and 3 levels of superiors above them all be reprimanded and actually be suspended from their jobs for 3 to 4 months. But that was reneged by whoever was the Secretary of Navy at the time. And the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Department told me that they had dropped the trespassing charges against me as a humanitarian gesture.
So what was the outcome of the lawsuit?
Well, within 2 or 3 months after they filed a lawsuit against me, I filed a lawsuit against the Navy. And we wound up being in court for 3 years. The judge, after a year and a half, threw out the train crew's suit, so he no longer had to contend with that. And this was 87, 88, 89, 90. I was determined to go to trial, of course, because it was a crime, and we couldn't find, however, any official of the county of Contra Costa, the state of California, or the country of the United States to file criminal charges against the Navy crew or especially the superiors who ordered the train to run. So we went into civil courts as an alternative, and we did a trial jury with the National Jury Project, which actually you hire them and they come and set up a mock trial, and they impanel jurors from the local jury panel and pay them. And I watch in a side room with one of my lawyers, and I watched 3 or 4 days of deliberations of this. There's a person playing judge, and then there's a person playing prosecutor, a person playing my lawyer, and then there's 12 jurors. And after this trial, it was a condensed trial. It was likely to have happened over 10 to 12 weeks if we went to trial. The jury found unanimously that the train ran intentionally, and therefore it was a criminal act, which meant that we would lose in court. And because you can only sue the federal government under the Federal Tort Claims Act, which means the government is liable for the negligence of its employees, but not for the intentional criminal acts of its employees. So we would have lost. The government would have simply filed a motion for directed verdict. We would have lost, and my lawyers already were at $500,000 in debt in the case. There were 21 lawyers working with the government and the three train crew members in this case, and so there was a lot at stake. We wound up, after I was depressed for a month after looking at this trial jury experiment, realizing that we had such a strong case that we were going to lose. And it wasn't so bad losing because it would have been a moral victory, but my lawyers would have gone bankrupt, and my lawyers were fantastic. I had been with them for 3 years. They did nothing but my case for 3 years. And it was like, well, what are we going to do? And so we wound up settling for $920,000. And the lawyers got half of it. So, it's just the way it goes when you're living in an empire, and the emperor runs the president. The imperial structure includes the judiciary, and you have to be a guerrilla and navigate your way through it.
Kathy has.
Ryan, what happened to your companions that were on the track?
Excellent question. What happened to my companions? There were 2 other veterans with me. One of whom was one of the veterans that was in the 47-day fast for life the year before. David Duncombe was a World War II and Korean War veteran who at the time was chaplain at San Francisco State, at the University of San Francisco Medical School. And Duncan Murphy, who had been one of the 4 veterans with me during the fast, he was also on this terrorist watch list, which of course we didn't know at the time. But Duncan jumped straight up the last second and grabbed the cow catcher rail. There's a railing above the cow catcher. Well, there's a platform above the cow catcher, and then there's a railing above the platform, which the spotters stand behind that railing and actually hold that railing. And he jumped straight up. He was 67 at the time. He jumped straight up and grabbed that cow catcher railing and looked at the two spotters in the face and had his hand on the railing next to their hands. And then he immediately jumped off because he knew I'd gone under. And he wanted to get to my body as soon as the train passed over me. And the other veteran, David Duncombe, who was the chaplain, he dove to the left. And he didn't get hurt. Duncan got a cut on his leg, but I have pictures of Duncan. There were 5 photographers there. I have pictures of Duncan sitting on the tracks after I'd been put in the ambulance, and his shirt is all bloodied. And because in the earlier photos of him after I got hit, he is hovering over my head, trying to keep me alive. And so my brain was completely open here. My skull was fractured, and I had a hole the size of a lemon in my forehead. And my wife at the time, and Jerry Condon, some of you who know, he and my wife were stopping the bleeding in my legs. The Navy ambulance arrived within 2 minutes and said that my body was not lying on Navy property and left, which delayed the other ambulance coming for about 14 minutes. The Navy fire truck came and actually did take my blood pressure and my vital signs, but I needed to get to a hospital. So, anyway, it was it was an attempted murder, and even some people on the base later said that they knew something was up that day, and that violence was going to happen, and the Navy Fire Department chief had positioned his fire trucks because he felt like there was a mood on the base that was designed to hurt us. And so there was one reason the fire truck actually did come with the fire truck EMT crew that at least rendered some assistance. But Duncan is now 89 years old, and he's still an activist. And David Duncombe is 80 or 81, living in White Salmon, Washington, White Salmon, and he's still very active. I'm sorry, 4 days after I got hit, while I was in the hospital, 9,000 people showed up at the tracks and ripped up the tracks. And they stacked them up. They stacked the railroad ties up and the metal tracks up, and made a big piece of sculpture out of it. Jesse Jackson came, and lots of musicians, I have a picture on my living room wall of the tracks being ripped up, and one of the guys who was in the picture gave me the picture. He's got a bandana on his face and a baseball hat on, and but it was a totally spontaneous action. It was planned with about 24 hours notice. Of course, the people were enraged, so it didn't take long to get 9,000 people to show up. And I'd love to see those pictures of the tracks piled up.
What a wonderful way to conclude that action.